Okay, so let's do this. All right, so there we are. Today we want to talk about thorax 2 and move on from there. All right. I hope you guys watched the previous videos, so that you can also appreciate what is happening here. Okay, so thorax 1 is done. So thorax 1 is done. Now we left with thorax 2, and then we'll also be doing the clinical. So that would be like our full circle to be in a place where we say we have understood thorax. So thorax 1, thorax 2, structures, and then all the clinical. Okay. So within the region of the thorax, now we're going to the internal organs. Okay, so the internal organs and the internal structures. We are done with the cage and the diaphragm. Okay. Now we want to look at the internal structures, which are the heart, the lungs. Okay, so the two lungs, and then the great vessels there, as well as the nerves, right, and the plexus that we find in thorax. And we also talk about some lymph nodes there, and then our thorax will be done. Okay. So now I want to then explain this concept. I can't see. Okay. So this concept over here. So the region of the thorax, we say that's the region located between the neck and the abdomen. Okay. And then with I need to remove that. Then the thorax now is divided. So it's a one whole cavity, but it has got subsets, okay, which are, number one is the pleura. So number one is the pleura, right? So we have the left and the right pleura. Okay. So that's where we have the lungs. So the right and the left pleura, right? And then we have this one now, it's called the mediastinum. So the mediastinum is the space that is located between the two pleura there. Okay. Mediastinum is that space located between the two pleura. Then the mediastinum is then divided, okay, into a superior mediastinum and an inferior mediastinum. So there was an omission there. This mediastinum is also then divided into a superior mediastinum. So we have a superior mediastinum and then an inferior mediastinum. The inferior mediastinum is the one then that we then divide into an anterior mediastinum, a medial mediastinum, and a posterior mediastinum. Okay, so I'm saying that the mediastinum is divided into superior mediastinum and inferior mediastinum. The inferior mediastinum is the one that is called the anterior part, the middle part where we have the heart, that is the pericardium, right, and the posterior mediastinum. Okay, all right. So those are the structures that we have there. All right, so I want to let me try and see what I can do there. Okay. Now, so this is the thorax, right? So that's the region of the thorax over there. So now the thorax now is divided into superior mediastinum, that is in blue, and the inferior mediastinum. So what is dividing? So if you go at the sternum there, there's a sternal angle. So that's the sternal angle that we see over here. So that's the sternal. That is the bending of the manubrium and the body of the sternum. So that's the sternal angle. Okay, right? So it's called the angle of Lewis. Okay, so just call the angle of Lewis. That's the right, the junction between the manubrium and the sternum, right? And then between the body of the thoracic vertebra number 4, so between T4 and T5, please get this. T4 and T5, the intervertebral disc, right? These two structures, that and that intervertebral, they lie at the same horizontal plane. Okay, so they lie at the same horizontal plane. So a line drawn there horizontally, that is that is the line that divides the superior mediastinum, right, and the inferior mediastinum. So that's the superior mediastinum, right? The inferior mediastinum is then divided into 3 now, right? The one part that we see here in yellow, so that part that we see there in yellow, right, that is the anterior mediastinum. So when you see it's small, so that's the anterior mediastinum. And this structure that we see, this organ, that's the thymus. Okay, so it's the thymus, you know, works in immunity, right? That's the thymus. So the lower part of the thymus, that's one prominent organ that we actually see in the anterior mediastinum, right? Okay, so you just have to know in the anterior mediastinum, we have the lower part of the thymus, just that, okay? Then the middle mediastinum is this part, the pericardium, that is with the heart, right? So that part, the pericardium, that is with the heart. So that is the middle mediastinum, okay? The middle mediastinum. So the inferior mediastinum is divided into anterior, middle, and then the posterior mediastinum is the one in green. Okay, so the posterior mediastinum is that one in green, right? So we appreciate that, right? That one in green. So this wall going down to where the diaphragm will be originating. So that wall part, this one, is what we call the posterior mediastinum. So can we see it's narrow and it's also long. So it's narrow and it's long, and it's got these great blood vessels as well as the esophagus thing. So that is called the posterior mediastinum. So if we come here, that's the same thing that we see there, right? That's the same thing that we see there. So that is the sternal angle. So this is the sternal angle or the angle of Louis, right? Horizontal line going between T4 and T5. The superior mediastinum and the inferior mediastinum. The inferior mediastinum is then divided into an anterior part and a posterior part and a middle part. So the heart is located within the middle mediastinum. Please note that. And I say that within anterior mediastinum, one thing that we have important is the thymus. And the thymus, you know, it just regresses with age. So you actually see remnants of the thymus in adults. Okay. Just see remnants of the thymus in adults, lower part of the thymus. And also, can you see that the thymus is also within the superior what? Superior mediastinum. Okay, within the superior. Now, having said that, so that is the mediastinum. Remember, we say it's long and narrow. It's got these great blood vessels there in the esophagus. All right. Okay, so now let's move. Okay, so remember we said that's the thorax, the whole thoracic cavity bordered by the diaphragm here, right? And can we see the suprapleural membrane? One, that is the suprapleural membrane. Okay, so it's going in the region of the neck. The suprapleural membrane. Here we have the pleural cavity. Here we have the pleural cavity. And then in the middle here, that's where we'll be having the middle mediastinum, but it's removed. What we can see is the posterior mediastinum. So those are the components of the posterior together, right? And that's the region of the abdomen. So if we look at it from sideways, so there we see the thymus. So can we see the thymus there? That's the thymus, right? And then we draw a line, right? And then these structures are in the superior mediastinum, right? And that's the middle mediastinum, and that's the posterior mediastinum. In this place should be a place where we have a lung sitting on, okay? That dome, right? So that's a dome. That's a dome for the diaphragm, right? And that's an opening, the Cava opening at 8, remember, 8 at T10, and then T12 over there, aortic opening, okay? Remember the diaphragm. Let's make it. Okay. Now.
Hello.
Yes.
Say, don't put him to previous slide.
Yes.
From the picture you could write, superior mediastinum in
from the picture we have.
Which one is the region?
Mediastinum. If I'm to cut
the superior.
The superior mediastinum, right? Yes. You draw a line. So we say that it's exactly here. So can you see the angle of fluid there? And then we go underneath the arc of the aorta there, right? Are we together?
Yeah.
Up with this, the intervertebral disc between 4 and 5. If we come here, now we're looking from anteriorly, so I'll just draw a line like this, right? Just going underneath the arc of the aorta. So this is the superior mediastinum, right? And that's the inferior what? Mediastinum. Okay. right?
Yes, thank you.
So I want you to understand this principle here, that if you draw a line, right, from the angle of Louis, right, to the intervertebral disc between 4 and 5, it will pass underneath the arc of the aorta, underneath the arc of the aorta. All right. So those are the structures. Now let's talk about the superior mediastinum, right? So let's talk about the superior mediastinum. You have to understand the components within the superior mediastinum, right? Concerning the aorta now, right? So that is the angle. So I'm looking anteriorly there, right? What you see is that within the superior mediastinum, you only have the arc of the aorta. So if a question comes and asks you which components of the aorta are within the superior mediastinum, if they say the ascending aorta, it's false, right? If they say the descending aorta, it's also false. What we only see is the arc of the aorta. That's what we see within the superior mediastinum and its branches, right? Its branches there, right? So it's 3 branches. That's what we, right? Right? The brachycephalic trunk and the left subclavian. That's what we see within the superior mediastinum and the arc of the aorta. These ascending and the descending, they're not part of that. Okay. And then we also see the upper part of the thymus. So we talked about this. We see the upper part of the thymus, right? We also see the left. Okay, so this is a branch of the vagus nerve that we call the left recurrent laryngeal nerve, right? You guys have even done neck, right? But I'll show you this nerve, right? So it's a recurrent, so it winds around what? The arc of the aorta. So that nerve will come from the region of the neck, right? Wind around that, go back to the, so just wind and go back to the neck. So that's called the left recurrent laryngeal. Remember, is the left. Okay, so if the question comes, is the left one. Okay. Then we also see the thoracic duct. Remember, we talked about the thoracic duct, right side of the body, posterior to everything, and then emerging posterior to the esophagus to drain at this point, right? So it's also within the superior what? Superior mediastinum there. Okay. So the thoracic duct, this one should be so easy, right? And then we have the superior vena cava, right? So the upper part of the superior, so that line, remember that line? There, and it. So the upper part of the superior vena cava formed by these 2 trunks there, right? The upper part of the superior vena cava found in the superior what? Mediastinum. Okay. And then its tributaries there. We also have got lymph nodes. So these lymph nodes, either they are lying closer to the trachea there, the paratracheal lymph nodes, right? We also have lymph nodes there. This one should just be very easy as well. And then we have the trachea and the esophagus, as we see, that is the trachea there, and the esophagus will just be posterior to the trachea there. So there we go. Okay, right. And remember, the esophagus also goes to the posterior mediastinum, right? But the trachea doesn't do that. Okay. Then we have the T1 to T4 sympathetic ganglion. So these ganglia, remember we talked about them, they are the vertebrae. So obviously, because T1 to T4 are the posterior relations or the posterior boundaries of the superior mediastinum, right? Hence, we also expect that the sympathetic ganglia can also there. So if a question comes and say we find the ganglia of T6 within the superior mediastinum, you don't even have to think about that. It's false, okay? Because we say that the posterior border for the superior mediastinum, it's vertebra 1, 2, 4. Okay, so the ganglia will be, parallel to each vertebra. All right. Okay. Now, then we have the internal, right? The internal thoracic vessels there. So remember the internal thoracic vessels, right? If it's for the arteries, they're coming from the subclavian, right? And then we say that they run about a finger breadth, right? Lateral to the sternum, right? Giving the anterior intercostal arteries and then dividing inferiorly into superior epigastric and the musculophrenic. Okay, so remember those vessels, right? Right, very, very important vessels there, especially for the sport test, right? So the internal thoracic vessels, there we found them, all right? Then we have the superior intercostal arteries. So remember, I said that the superior intercostal arteries, right, are a branch of the costocervical artery, which is a branch of the subclavian, right? And then we say they supply the intercostal spaces number 1 and number 2, right? So that the intercostal spaces for number 3 are then coming straight from this descending aorta. Okay, so the superior intercostal arteries there, right? And then also the superior hemiazigas veins, we also find them there, right? But what I want you to understand is that concerning the trachea, we find it within the superior mediastinum, right? But not the inferior mediastinum, right? Why? Because the trachea bifurcates at the same line that divides the superior mediastinum from the inferior mediastinum. Are we together? So can I use a better picture there, right? So there we are, right? Underneath the arc of the aorta, there we have this structure that we call the carina, which is the division of the trachea, right? So can you see that the trachea is within the superior mediastinum? So when it divides, its branches then are within the inferior mediastinum. Okay, are we together there? Right. So the trachea would divide at this angle of Louis. So the carina, if they ask you the structures that we find at the angle of Louis, we find the bifurcation of the trachea, right? We find the under part, right, of the arc of the aorta. This is the recurrent laryngeal nerve that I was talking about, this nerve, right? So it's coming from the neck, right? It's a branch of the vagus, right? So the vagus is continuing downwards, right? Then it's given as a branch. So just given as a branch there, then it winds. Then can you see that recurrent? It's going up again back to the neck. So that is why it's called the recurrent laryngeal nerve, right? So that recurrent laryngeal nerve, we find it within the superior what? Mediastinum. Okay. So if they ask you also structures that you find at this angle of Louis, or that line that divides the superior mediastinum and the inferior, I've told you, we find the carina, right? We find the carina, we find the manubriosternal joint, right? We find the recurrent laryngeal nerve straight walking around the arc of the aorta. All right, so that is the carina, that is the trachea dividing at the carina to give the left and the right and the left principal bronchus. Okay, you understand much of this when I talk about this later on. All right. So anyway, so that is the superior mediastinum. Now let's talk about the posterior mediastinum. So remember, posterior mediastinum. So now we're looking from above, right? We're looking from above. That's a vertebra. That's the body wall. That is the pleura. That's the pleura. That is the heart. That is the middle mediastinum, and that is the anterior mediastinum. So you see that small space there. That's the smallest compartment. Anterior mediastinum. We say there is the thymus there, right? And then the middle mediastinum, we have the heart, the pericardium, right? And then the posterior mediastinum, where we have the vessels there, all right? The great vessels in the esophagus. So let me also talk about Kaspesika so that we also understand, okay? All right, so there we are. We have what? The descending aorta, right? Very good. Because we said that the arc of the aorta is within the superior mediastinum. The descending now is within the posterior mediastinum, right? So there we have the descending aorta. We have the esophagus, yes, right? We have the Azigas vein. So there is the Azigas vein over here. So that's the Azigas vein. Remember, if a question comes and asks you that the components of the superior mediastinum are the following: A, the Azigas vein, you say false, okay? Because the Azigas veins join the superior vena cava below the angle of Louis. So can you see that Azigas vein? They're draining, okay, right? So we can't say, so we actually can't say that it's within the superior mediastinum. So it drains below the line, okay, right? Hope you get that. So the Azigas vein is a component of the posterior mediastinum only, right? And then we said that posterior to the esophagus and posterior to everything, just anterior to the vertebra, we have the thoracic duct. So it's also a component of the posterior mediastinum, as well as a component of the superior mediastinum, okay? Because we say that it will actually extend to the region of the neck. So it actually extends to the region of the neck, all right, as it crosses the midline. And remember the position that we said the thoracic duct crosses the midline from right to left. It was at T5. It was a T5, right? Remember the lymph drainage from the last lecture there, right? When you talked about lymph drainage. All right. So that is the posterior mediastinum. The middle mediastinum and the anterior mediastinum, where we say that we only have what? The lower part of the thymus. The lower part of a thymus. The posterior mediastinum, we have the descending aorta there, right? The esophagus, right? Then if they ask you, right? If they ask you, so let's come a little bit back there, right? So that's the superior the superior vena cava there, right? What about the inferior vena cava? What can we say about the inferior vena cava, right? It's not within the posterior mediastinum. So can you see where the posterior mediastinum is? There posteriorly where you have this group, this gang, right? There we have that gang, right? The inferior vena cava from the abdomen just pierces the diaphragm at T8 and quickly enters the right atrium, right? So it's not within the posterior mediastinum. We say we have the descending aorta, right? We have the Azigas vein, right? That we can see it's posterior there, right? And then we have these. So if they ask you also about the vagus nerves, right? It's true. Why is it true? Because the vagus nerves will be moving with the esophagus, right? Because remember, we said that at the esophageal opening, right? That's where we also have the opening of the vagus nerves, right? Now we'll be calling them the gastric nerves because they're closer to the stomach. But actually, just know that the vagus nerves pass there, right, at the esophageal opening. So they are very close friends, all right? So if I say that the vagus nerves are within the posterior mediastinum, that's true, okay? Why? Because they are friends with this guy, okay? Fine, right? Then the recurrent, remember, I said the recurrent only winds there and then comes back there, right, to the neck. So the recurrent is not a component of the inferior mediastinum, okay, right? Then, so what about the middle mediastinum now? So that is what we call the pericardium, right? The pericardium. So that is that. So can you see the thymus in the anterior mediastinum? The thymus there, then with the posterior mediastinum, right? So if I can draw a line, if I can actually draw a line, that's the Azigas vein in the posterior mediastinum, drains into the superior vena cava before, right? Before we get to the angle of Louis, right? So it's within the posterior mediastinum, not the superior mediastinum. Okay, then that's the superior vena cava. That we say that the upper part is within the superior mediastinum, right? Are we together? Right. Then now that is, so this part that we have the heart there, right? So this part that we have the heart, right? That is the middle mediastinum. Okay, that is the pericardium. All right. Then the pericardium has got coverings there. The pericardium actually has got coverings there, right? I'll talk much about this region when I look at the heart specifically, but let's just, talk about some few things there, all right? So it's covered by, number one, a fibrous pericardium. So it's actually fibrous, all right? So it's much of a protecting layer, the fibrous pericardium. So outwards, it's covered by the fibrous pericardium, right? And then on top of fibrous pericardium, we see some fat there. So can you see the fat? So that's the fat there. All right, then deeper to the fibrous pericardium, we have the serous pericardium. But the serous pericardium is actually in two laminas, right? In two laminas or in two layers. Let me change the color there. Two laminas or in two layers, actually, right? We have the parietal layer, right? And the serous layer, all right? We have the parietal layer and the serous layer, right? So let's take it like this. So we have the fibrous layer outside. So we have this layer outside, right? And then inside we have the parietal layer and the serous layer, right? We have the parietal layer and the serous layer. Let me use also different colors there, right? This serous layer is divided into two: parietal, right? Which is just underneath the fibrous, and then the serous, right? Then deeper to the serous, we actually have the heart. So we have the heart there, right? Deeper to the serous, we have the heart. These two layers are tethered together, so they're just in direct contact there, right? So these two layers, the fibrous pericardium and the parietal layer of serous pericardium, they're tethered together, right? So they're actually tethered together, so that the nerve supply is the same. So the nerve supply there is the same, okay? The nerve supply is the same, the blood supply is the same. Even the embryological derivation is just the same. The embryological derivation is just the same. They come from the parietal layer. That's funny, right? actually come from the parietal layer of the lateral plate mesothelium. Okay. Then the serous layer, right, is tethered to the heart. Okay. So actually tethered to the heart tissue there, right? So the nerve supply of the heart is the same nerve supply of the serous layer. Okay. So that is the autonomic supply. Since the heart is an internal organ, so autonomic nerves also supply the serous layer, right? These guys will get their nerve supply, right, from somatic nerves. Somatic nerves, you know, you guys need deep nerve and muscle. You understand what somatic, right? So the somatic nerves, autonomic nerves is the heart. So those are the coverings. Then between the parietal layer and the serous layer, right, we actually have got fluid there, right? We actually have got fluid, right? This fluid is what we call the pericardial fluid. So peri outside the heart, cardia, and it's fluid, which is about 50 mils, right? Between the parietal layer and the serous layer. So this fluid is just aiding in lubrication when the heart is moving, right? It's also aiding in lubrication there, okay? If this fluid increases so much, they compress the heart and it becomes a problem, okay? Right. So the fibrous, you know, plus parietal develop from the same layer, which is the parietal layer of lateral plate mesothelium, okay? We talked about this in embryology there. Hence, the nerve supply is from a somatic nerve, which is this phrenic nerve. Okay, so they get their nerve supply from the phrenic nerve. And the phrenic nerves are these nerves. So can you see that nerve? That one. So from the this right view, we see the phrenic nerves. So the phrenic nerves, you know, they move in direct contact with the pericardia, right? With the fibrous pericardia. So they're just outside the fibrous pericardia. So there you have a nerve there, right? Outside the fibrous what? Pericardium. And these nerves are the phrenic nerves. So if you get them in a spot test, those are the phrenic nerves, right? In the region of the thorax, two main nerves that we're concerned about mainly is the phrenic nerve and the vagus nerve. You mustn't even claim. The phrenic nerve are in direct contact with the heart. The vagus nerves, I told you, they are moving with their friend there, the esophagus. So that's the simple thing, right? That is the simple thing. And that will help you in understanding which nerve goes anterior or posterior to the root of the lung. So that's the root of the lung. The lung was removed here. So that is the root of the lung there. So you see that because the heart is anteriorly, right, in the mediastinum, right? These guys, you know, the phrenic nerves, they want the heart, right? They actually want the heart because they want to supply the fibrous pericardia. So they pass anterior to the root of the lung, okay? Then the vagus, they run with the esophagus. So they run posterior to the root of the lung. That's simple, okay? You don't even have to claim them, okay? Then the blood supply of the fibrous pericardium comes from what we call the pericardiophrenic artery, which is a branch of the internal thoracic. So if you remember our thorax one, we talked about this branch, the pericardiophrenic. So why is it called pericardiophrenic? It supplies the pericardium, right? Very good. And then goes down to supply the diaphragm as well. So that's why it's called the pericardiophrenic arteries. Okay, right? So these are the pericardiophrenic. So when you see this, those ones, they just been given as a branch from that guy. Can you see that guy there? That is the internal thoracic. So it's giving a branch there. That is the pericardiophrenic. Okay, right. So we're left with 10 minutes there, right? So I'll just, you know, introduce you to the respiratory system. Then in our next lecture that we have just after this, we'll talk more about the respiratory system. Okay, so that's the respiratory system. So remember we had the mediastinum here. We said this is the pleura, and the mediastinum in between. Okay, mediastinum. So the pleura is divided into right pleura and the left pleura, right? And then this is a trachea, right? It's not even within the pleura, right? But divides right in the angle of blue where we have the carina. So that's where we have this, you know, the bifurcation of the trachea is called the carina, right? Dividing into a right principal bronchi and a left principal bronchi. Right principal bronchi and a left principal bronchi. All right, that's the trachea there, right, within the superior mediastinum. Okay, then the principal bronchi will then divide into lobar branches to the lobes, the lobar branches. Then from there we have the divisions up to the last level to the alveolus, right? Microscopic structures there, right? So that's our lung, right? The carina, that's the division, right? And at the carina, we say that's where we have the end of fluid passing through, right? Going to T4 between intervertebral disc between T4 and T5. All right. Okay. Right. Then, so that's the lung. One lung there and the other lungs there, and the space in between there, that's where we have the heart. Okay. The space in between there, that's where we have the heart. And this are the impressions created by the dooms of the diaphragm, right? Created by the dooms of the diaphragm, right? And then we have the heart sitting in between, right? So the heart sitting in between. So generally, that's an introduction to the respiratory system there, right? But I won't talk much there. Let's come and revise a little bit so that we can end the lecture there. Now, remember, I said the superior mediastinum and inferior mediastinum are divided by a line drawn from the joint between the manubrium, right, and the sternum. So the manubriosternal joint, right, and that line goes horizontal, right, to the intervertebral disc between 4 and 5. Please, it's not 3 and 4, like, you know, it's common confusion. It's 4 and 5, right? So just say T45. So if just say T45. Okay, so if I can say T45, there you just get it. Okay, so T45, right? So we say that within the superior mediastinum, we have what? The arc of the iota, right? Arc of the iota, right? This diagram is a bit mixed up. Arc of the iota there, right? And then let me jump to this one. Let me before I go there. We say that the trachea will bifurcate, right, at the carina, right? Actually bifurcate at the carina there, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, exactly, right? So there we are, right? Between 4 and 5, we draw a line, right? We have the arc of the iota only within the superior mediastinum, right? The ascending part, right? The ascending part is within the mid mediastinum. The descending part, right, is within the posterior mediastinum, right? The arc of the iota and its branches, right? Now together, the brachiocephalic trunk and the left common carotid and the left subclavian, okay? And then the esophagus and the trachea, yes. The upper part of the thymus, yes. The vagus nerve, yes, of course, because it's traveling with the esophagus. Even we see the vagus nerve also going there within the posterior mediastinum, right? So the vagus nerves are always following this esophagus, like we are going with you until we pierce the diaphragm at your opening. So those are the vagus nerves. But the recurrent laryngeal, the recurrent will just wind there and go back to the neck. So the left recurrent we find within the superior what? Mediastinum. So remember, I said the left recurrent, please, the left recurrent, okay? The anterior mediastinum, we find the lower part of the thymus down there. Then the mid mediastinum, we find the heart. So these are the caverns, the pericardium, right? The fibrous pericardium outside, and then the parietal layer, that parietal layer there, and then we have the visceral layer there, right? Then in between them, we say there's fluid, right? So that's it now. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, that was the revision. Then let me see. Today, also we also talked about, so this is just the root of the lung. So the lung will enroot from here, right? So the lung that was removed here, that is the root of the lung. So these structures are then passing to the lung, right? And remember, I said this. This is the vagus nerve. You find in the posterior mediastinum. So there is the vagus, moving there. Can you see that with the esophagus, right? Right. That's a phrenic nerve. Okay. So if you're in a spot test, that's actually a phrenic nerve. If you just remember, the phrenic nerve wants to supply the fibrous pericardium and the parietal layer of serous, right, up to the diaphragm. So remember, we said the phrenic nerve supplies the diaphragm, sore motor, right? So it moves outside this fibrous pericardium, all right? And then moving with it are the pericardiophenic vessels, right? So that's the pericardiophenic artery, pericardiophenic vein, right? The pericardiophenic artery is a branch of the internal. So that one, can you see that guy? The internal thoracic, it's a branch of it, all right? Are we together there? So if they ask you that passing anteriorly to the hilar of the lung, right, or the root of the lung, right, is the vagus nerve, you say false, right? You boldly say it's false, right? Why? Because the vagus nerve can't pass anteriorly to the hile of the lung, right? Because it's not like the esophagus is going to pass anterior to that. The esophagus is posterior. So the vagus nerve passes posterior to the root of the lung, right? Are we together? So if you can actually see there, that's a principal bronchus going to the lung, and we see that the vagus nerve is passing posterior, right? Are we together? But this azigas, the phrenic nerve actually passes anterior to that. Why? Because it's going to the heart that is located anteriorly. Okay. Are we together? Right. So that finishes this short segment of this. We'll continue just after this to start off with our time. Okay. Yes. If they ask you a question saying that the vagus nerve passes anterior to the root of the lung, you actually say false. Okay. Because the vagus nerve follows the esophagus, right? So it passes posteriorly to, so that's the root of the lung. So these structures are going to the lung. Okay. Right.
Yes.
And then if they ask you about the phrenic nerve passes anteriorly. Actually, Snell talks about that. And you don't have to claim it. Okay. It's so simple as illustrated here. Are we together? All right. So that also helps us in our spot testing. All right. Right. So good time, boosters. We see you in the next segment. Right.